Facing a midlife crisis? Find courage in everyday women's stories. Subscribe to Resilient Women Rising.
The Hidden Melody: How a 49-year-old divorced woman reunited her family through an unlikely song. Julia pressed her trembling hand against the letter's inked seal, her breath catching as she read the single line scrawled in her grandson's looping script: "Grandma, I miss you. Please come." At 49 and newly divorced after 20 years of marriage, Julia had prepared herself for a quiet life of solitude, but nothing could have braced her for the pain of being shut out by her only son's wife. She'd once dreamed of Sunday dinners filled with laughter now. Her living room sat empty, her heart heavier with every passing day. That afternoon, she found herself standing before the locked gate of her son Mark's suburban home, the early autumn wind tugging at her cardigan as if urging her to give up. A stern-faced neighbor peered through the fence. No surprise there. Rumors had already spread that Julia was the reason Mark and his wife Clara had fallen out. Julia's fingers hovered over the intercom, her mind racing with everything she hadn't said: how she'd supported Mark through his first heartbreak, how she'd watched him build a family from scratch. But Clara's icy text messages made it clear that no apology would ever be enough. Just as she turned to leave, a faint melody drifted from inside the soft, tinny notes of a music box tune Julia hadn't heard since her own childhood. It was the very same song she had taught Mark on his brown and white keyboard when he was 6. Compelled by a mixture of nostalgia and hope, she pressed the intercom button. "Mark, it's me," she whispered. Outside, the music stopped abruptly, and Julia's heart plummeted. Was this the moment she would finally hear Clara's door click shut, forever marking her place as an outsider? Or could that familiar melody still carry the magic needed to heal the rift? Julia's heart thundered as the intercom clicked back to life. "Mom?" Mark's voice was softer than she remembered, trembling, uncertain. She swallowed hard. "It's me, Julia." A long pause followed, the kind that stretched seconds into lifetimes. Then the front door slowly swung open. Moonlight spilled across the threshold, illuminating Mark's ashen face and the delicate, cracked music box he held in trembling hands. Its once sweet tune had warped into something plaintive and broken, mirroring the fractures in their family. Mark stepped aside wordlessly, and Julia crossed the threshold into the foyer room, cluttered with the detritus of a life, paused a half-unpacked diaper bag, a child's red rubber boot, a stack of unopened mail. She glanced at the music box in his hands. "I found it in the attic," he said, voice raw. "I thought maybe it could fix things." The hollow echo of desperation in his words cut deeper than any argument. Behind them, a door creaked. Clara appeared in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes wary. For a heartbeat, silence crackled between them like static. Julia raised a hand to the music box, uncertain whether to offer comfort or apology first. The weight of Mark's gaze and Clara's wary suspicion pressed down on her chest. Then, from the depths of the foyer, a small voice called out, "Grandma?" Julia turned to see her grandson peeking around the corner, clutching his toy train. In that instant, time seemed to pivot on a knife's edge. Would this familiar face be enough to heal them all, or was the damage too deep? Julia knelt beside her grandson, gently brushing his tousled hair as he stared up at her with wide, uncertain eyes. The foyer's dim light caught the gleam of the cracked music box resting between them, its warped melody still hanging in the air like a fragile promise. Clara hovered at the threshold of the hallway, arms folded, her stiff posture softening for the first time as she watched Julia hum the lullaby she once sang to Mark. "I used to play this for your dad every night," Julia whispered, voice thick with memory. She wound the tiny key and set the box on the floor. As its tinny notes sprang forth, the boy's hands reached out to touch the dancing ballerina inside. The simple joy on his face cracked something open in Clara's heart, a long-buried ache she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Mark stepped forward, brushing a tear from his cheek. "Mom, I thank you," he choked out, voice trembling. Julia's breath hitched, the weight of their years of silence settling around her like dust. For a moment, nothing moved but the ballerina's spin and the soft cadence of the tunia heartbeat, forging new connections in the hush. Then the music abruptly stuttered and stopped. The ballerina froze mid-twirl. Julia reached down to lift the lid, but Mark pulled back, his hand tight on hers. "Wait," he said. Inside the box, tucked beneath faded velvet, lay a small folded note in Clara's handwriting, words neither of them had seen before. Clara's lips parted as she recognized her own script. "I wrote this when I was 16, she breathed, stepping closer. But before she could unfold it, a sudden knock rattled the front door, sharp and urgent. Julia's pulse quickened as she turned the deadbolt and swung open the door. There, framed in the hallway light, stood David, her ex-husband, holding a manila envelope and a small bundle of official papers. His face was drawn, apologetic. Behind him, the street lay still, as if time itself had paused to witness this moment. "Julia," he said softly, "I didn't expect to find you here, but I have to give this to you." He extended the stack of documents. Julia's breath caught as she recognized the header custody petition. Her hands trembled when she took them. Mark stepped forward, protective muscles taut. "What is this?" he demanded. David glanced past Julia at his grandson, playing quietly in the foyer. "Clara's sister filed for full custody through my attorney," he explained, voice thick. "She claimed I haven't been a fit parent since the divorce, and she's asking the court to remove you from his life entirely." Clara's face went pale. She collapsed onto the nearest chair, staring at the papers as if they were a foreign language. Julia's chest tightened with a familiar ache, the fear of losing her grandson all over again. I thought we were healing," Julia whispered, looking from Mark's furious stance to Clara's distraught tears. The music box rested on the floor between them, its ballerina forever frozen in mid-twirl. In that charged silence, the family realized their fragile reconciliation was now under threat. The very moment they dared to believe in second chances, a new devastating conflict had arrived on that would test their unity and force them to fight for the smallest voice in the room. Julia's world narrowed to the crumpled custody papers in her hand and the helpless expression on her grandson's face as he tugged at her skirt. Mark squared his shoulders, eyes blazing with protective fury. "We won't let this happen," he declared, voice echoing off the foyer walls. Clara, cheeks wet with tears, pressed her lips together, struggling to summon the courage to fight for the boy she loved. Julia steadied herself, pressing a hand to her racing heart. "We need a plan," she said softly, meeting Mark's gaze. The music box lay between them, a silent reminder of how fragile their bond still was. "We'll find a lawyer who understands this family, and we'll gather every letter, every memory that proves Eno. We're part of his life." Outside, a single car door slammed. All eyes snapped toward the window, where Anne, Julia's estranged sisters, stood watching with enigmatic concern. She had come hoping to heal old wounds, not to face legal battles. Now, her sudden presence felt like another twist in the melody of their lives. Clara pulled the small note from the music box with trembling fingers. The ink was smudged, but legible. "Family is the song that never ends." She read the words aloud, her voice breaking, and in that moment, Julia understood the real battle wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in keeping the music of their family alive against every discord. A sharp ring shattered the fragile resolve. Mark's phone buzzed insistently with an unknown number. He glanced at the screen, dread crossing his face. "It's the court clerk," he whispered. "They want us to come in tomorrow morning or they'll rule by default." Julia swallowed hard, the gravity of a deadline pressing down on her. The weight of years of silence, of broken promises, now hinged on a single day. As the family huddled together, hearts pounding in unison, the antique music box sat open and still. Its ballerina paused mid-twirl, as if holding its breath for what came next. Dawn broke gray and drizzly as Julia's alarm rang, dragging her from a restless sleep filled with fragments of tears and courtroom stakes. She dressed in her best navy cardigan and a simple pearl necklace, her grandmother's heirloom, now a talisman against the day's uncertainties. Mark hovered by the front door, briefcase in hand, his jaw set in determined lines. Clara tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, clenching the custody papers as though willing them to vanish. In the cramped waiting room of their chosen family lawyer, the smell of stale coffee mingled with the hushed murmurs of other clients. Julia's palms were slick as her attorney, Ms. Ramirez, a brisk woman with warm, steady eyes, sifted through their dossier. Handwritten letters from Mark's childhood, photos of Julia teaching her grandson to play the lullaby, even a grainy home video clip showing baby footsteps toward Julia's open arm saw, carefully organized as proof that Julia was more than a chance visitor in her grandson's life. "Your case is strong, Ms." Ramirez said, tapping the table with a confident finger. "But Clara's sister has influence. We need one more pivotal piece, something undeniable." She slid a USB drive across the table. "I've subpoenaed Clara's teenage journal entries. Remember that prom photo you found? The one where you both laughed by the old oak tree? That, with your note tucked inside, could be the final ace." Julia caught her breath, recalling the journal's hidden compartment. It had belonged to Clara's mother and held a note praising Julia's kindness, proof the family had once accepted her. Mark reached over and squeezed Julia's hand. Together they rose, resolve hardening in their chests. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the pavement like nervous applause. As they slipped into the courtroom, Julia's heart pounded in time with the echo of her own footsteps. Across the room, Clara's sister sat impassive, legal pads stacked like barriers between them. When Ms. Ramirez called their names, Julia swallowed the lump in her throat, tightened her grip on the USB drive, and walked to the stand. She could feel the weight of every letter, every melody, every whispered memory pressing her forward. Tomorrow's verdict would decide more than custody. It would determine whether Love's song could truly outlast discord. The courtroom's hush felt heavier than the rain pounding the windows outside. Julia's fingers curled around the USB drive as Ms. Ramirez stood before the judge, her calm confidence projecting throughout the chamber. She clicked a laptop and the screen behind them flickered to life. The prom photo of a young Clara and Julia laughing beneath the oak tree, the torn journal page nestled in its frame. Julia watched Clara's sister's face drain of color. Mark squeezed Julia's hand beneath the table, his eyes steady with hope. Then Ms. Ramirez played the audio, Clara's own teenage voice whispering, "Your kindness saved me," that night word spoken years ago to Julia, now echoing through the courtroom as undeniable proof of Julia's place in the family. The judge leaned forward, eyes softening. "Ms. Thompson," he said to Clara's sister, "you may present any rebuttal." The sister rose, her legal pad shaking. She cleared her throat and produced transcripts of social services emails, claims that Julia had once missed daycare, pickups and arrived late to school recitals, attempts to paint her as unreliable. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Julia's heart stuttered. Clara's sister paused, and for a moment the courtroom teetered on the edge of judgment. Then, from the back row, a small voice spoke, "That's not true." All eyes turned to the gallery where Julia's grandson stood, tugging at his mother's sleeve. He stepped forward, his little boots clicking softly on the marble floor. "Grandma always sings me the lullaby in the morning," he said, voice trembling but clear. "She's never late." Silence crashed into the room. Even the judge's gavel seemed to pause mid-air. Julia's chest swelled with pride and relief as the boy climbed the steps to stand beside her. Clara's sister sank into her chair, her own eyes welling. The judge exchanged a glance with Ms. Ramirez and then addressed the boy. "Do you swear this is the truth?" The child nodded, eyes shining. Before the judge could continue, the courtroom door burst open. A court clerk rushed in, holding a sealed envelope stamped "Urgent Confidential." The clerk's voice trembled. "Your Honor, this just arrived from the governor's office regarding recent custody rulings." A tense hush fell. Julia's breath caught as the envelope landed on the judge's bench. Its contents could change everything in an instant. A hush fell as the clerk laid the thick envelope on the judge's bench. The judge broke the seal and read aloud, by directive of the governor's office under the new Grandparents' Rights Act. All custodial changes are stayed and current arrangements remain in effect. An emergency hearing must reconvene within 12 hours to determine visitation and guardianship. He looked over his glasses. This court will reconvene at 8 o'clock this evening. Court is adjourned until then. Relief and tension warred on Julia's face. Mark exhaled a shaky breath. Clara's hand tightened around her mother's, gratitude and fear mingling in her eyes. Ms. Ramirez stood swiftly, gathering her papers. "We have only hours now. We need the original journal entry, the family video, and 2 more character witnesses ready to testify," she said, voice taut with urgency. From the back row, Anne rose, clutching a battered tote bag. I have Clara's mother's journal and Mrs. Bennett, the preschool director, is on her way, she announced. Julia nodded, adrenaline surging through her veins. They spilled out of the courtroom, their footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. As they hurried toward the elevator, Julia's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She glanced at the screen. It was the social worker who'd filed the original complaint. Her message flashed, unsettling in its brevity. Meet me at room 307, now. Julia hesitated a heartbeat. Did this signal a last-minute ally or another twist in their desperate fight? Julia slipped into the narrow hallway outside room 307, Mark at her side and Clara clutching Anne's battered tote. The fluorescent light hummed overhead as the social worker, Ms. Hayes, ushered them inside. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she closed the door behind them with a trembling hand. "Two didn't want this to happen, Ms." Hayes began, voice quivering. She slid a thick file across the desk. "Your sister-in-law pressured me to amplify every missed pickup, every late arrival. She even coached witnesses to testify against you." Julia's breath caught as she flipped through pages of draft reports and interview transcripts, proof that the original complaint had been manipulated. Relief washed over them, but the clock on the courthouse wall glared 5:47 p.m. "Ms. Hayes continued in a hushed tone, I've signed an affidavit recanting the false statements. Take this directly to the judge immediately." Mark's phone buzzed with a reminder, 600 p.m. Contact Mrs. Bennett. "We need her testimony before the emergency hearing," he said, already dialing. Clara squeezed Julia's hand in gratitude, tears bright on her cheeks. As they hurried back to the lobby, Anne patted her tote to retrieve Clara's mother's journal, but her eyes went wide. "It's gone," she whispered. "It was right here." Julia's heart sank. Without the journal's hidden prom night note, they'd lose their final cornerstone of evidence. The hallway spun as possibilities raced through her mind. Had Clara's sister intercepted it? Or was it still in the courtroom, buried under displaced files? Time was slipping through their fingers, and the next steps would decide everything. Julia burst into the courthouse vestibule, clutching Ms. Hayes' signed affidavit, Mark at her heels, Clara and Anne a breath behind. Their hearts pounded as they raced past marble pillars toward the courtroom. Door only to find it shut tight, a wooden barricade between them and their last chance. "Wait," Julia called, but the bailiff had already locked it after the previous session. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood, panic swirling as time slipped through their fingers. Mark rummaged in his briefcase for a key Ms. Ramirez had obtained only to discover it wasn't there. Clara's eyes darted to Anne's tote. Anne patted every pocket, face draining of color. The journal was gone. Julia inhaled deeply, summoning every ounce of the calm she'd found in her music box lullaby. "He won't be here without it," Mark whispered, tears threatening. "He brought it to court earlier." At that moment, a small voice piped up from Julia's shoulder. Their grandson, wide-eyed, unzipped his miniature backpack and held out the battered journal. "Grandma, you forgot this," he announced proudly. Relief and disbelief washed over them as Julia scooped him into her arms. They unlocked the door and spilled into the courtroom just as Ms. Ramirez rose to present the note hidden in Clara's mother's prom photo. But before she could speak, the court clerk approached the bench with a new filing, a temporary evidentiary restraining order issued at Clara's sister's insistence. No late evidence would be admitted without explicit judicial leave. The judge's gavel hovered midair. Julia's hand tightened around the journal. Mark's jaw clenched. In that breathless moment, the fate of their family hung on one final ruling. Would the judge allow this last piece of proof to break the cycle of discord, or would it be barred forever? Silence gripped the courtroom as the judge studied the battered prom night journal, Ms. Hayes' recantation, and finally, the tiny rebel voice of Julia's grandson atop the bench. Clara's sister rose to object, but the judge held up a hand. "This court will hear this evidence," he declared, voice calm yet resolute. "The best interests of the child and the integrity of family bonds must guide us." A collective breath released itself around the room. Julia's knees felt weak as Ms. Ramirez hurried forward, placing the journal and affidavit before the judge. Mark squeezed Julia's hand in fierce relief. Clara's lip trembled, tears finally breaking free. Across the aisle, Clara's sister sank back into her chair, her stern mask replaced by stunned resignation. The judge paused to let the truth settle, then spoke again. Given the clear demonstration of Julia's role in her grandson's life and the troubling evidence of manipulated testimony, this court upholds the existing custodial arrangement. Grandmother's visitation and guardianship remain intact pending final hearings. Furthermore, I strongly encourage the family to pursue mediation. Julia felt her throat tighten as the clerk recorded his ruling. In that moment, the oppressive weight of months of fear and uncertainty lifted like a heavy curtain. She rose, gathering her grandson into her arms as tears of joy streamed down both their faces. Mark and Clara joined the embrace, and even Anne stepped forward to wrap Julia in a sister's forgiveness. As they exited the courtroom, the afternoon sun washed the marble steps in gentle warmth. Julia paused, looking down at the little boy clutching her hand. He smiled up at her, the remnants of the music box lullaby still echoing in his giggle. In that perfect, ordinary moment, so far from the legal battleground, they found their true victory. Outside, a single bird sang from atop a lamppost, its clear, hopeful notes carrying on the breeze. Julia inhaled deeply, embracing the sweet promise of tomorrow, and knowing that, at last, the family's hidden melody had been restored. That evening, Julia tucked her grandson into bed for the first time in months, humming the familiar lullaby as the boy's eyelids fluttered closed. In the corridor, Mark and Clara waited outside his door, sharing a quiet smile that spoke of tender reconciliation. The courthouse battle was behind them, but the real work of rebuilding trust was only beginning. Downstairs in the living room, Julia placed the restored music box back on its mantle, symbol of the journey they'd endured. Clara's sister, Emily, stood hesitantly in the doorway, clutching a small bouquet of garden roses. She cleared her throat, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I let my fears come between us. I hope you can forgive me." Julia offered a gentle smile and reached out to take the roses. "We're family," she replied. "The music only matters if we play it together." Emily's relief was palpable as she crossed the room to embrace them both, the three of them forming a circle renewed by humility and hope. Later, as rain pattered softly against the window panes, the entire family gathered around the old oak dining table for their first Sunday dinner in months. Between bites of steaming soup and fresh bread, they shared stories rather than grievances. Mark recounted childhood mischief, Clara laughed over her mother's teenage tomfoolery, and Julia listened, heart full. Even Anne joined in with fond recollections of long-ago family vacations. When dessert arrived, a homemade apple pie, Julia lifted the music box's lid one last time. The ballerina twirled in perfect, unbroken circles as they all joined hands, humming the melody she had taught them long ago. In that harmonious moment, every note felt like a promise that love, once rediscovered, could endure any storm. Spring sunlight filtered through the living room windows as Julia sat at her piano, gently playing the lullaby that had become the family's anthem of renewal. Her grandson bounced beside her on the bench, learning the notes with eager fingers. Outside, laughter carried in on the breeze. Mark, Clara, Anne, and even Emily planting tulip bulbs in the front garden, their voices weaving into a tapestry of hope. When Julia paused, the house felt complete for the first time in years. No more locked doors, no more courtroom battles, only the promise of ordinary days made extraordinary by love. She rose and placed a hand on the music box's lid as it sat on the mantel, its ballerina glimmering in mid-twirl. Then came the knock-soft but insistent echoing through the stillness. Julia opened the door to find a slender woman in a tailored coat, clutching a weathered leather satchel. She introduced herself as Rose Abernathy, granddaughter of the original artisan who crafted the very music box at the heart of Julia's story. In her hands, she held a small, tarnished key and an aged letter addressed to the box's keeper of hope. Julia's heart skipped as Rose handed over the letter. Its handwriting was elegant yet hurried, penned decades ago. Only when the melody has healed 3 hearts shall the final secret be revealed. Inside the letter lay a cryptic map overlaying the coastlines of Julia's hometown with a series of symbols pointing to an old lighthouse. Rose's eyes shone with quiet urgency. My grandmother believed this music box could do more than soothe, it could guide those who listen toward a place of true transformation. You've already proven its power. Now she asks you to follow the melody one step further. Julia clutched the map, the weight of possibility stirring in her chest. Behind her, her family's laughter drifted from the garden Mark's booming chuckle, Clara's gentle giggle, her grandson's delighted squeals. Yet now there was a new path calling, one that could lead to an even deeper family secret or a wondrous discovery about the box's creator. As Rose stepped back into the afternoon light, Julia realized that their journey was far from over. The melody had reunited her family, but its final promise still lay hidden, waiting to be unlocked at the edge of the sea. Julia studied the faded map by lamplight, its intricate lines whispering of salt-tinged air and crashing waves. Before dawn the next morning, she and Mark loaded Clara's old station wagon with blankets, a thermos of coffee, and the music box resting reverently in Julia's lap. The sky was a pale watercolor as they drove through winding lanes toward the coast, the world still hushed in anticipation. When they crested the final hill, the lighthouse appeared, a white tower streaked with rust, standing sentinel against a slate-gray sea. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries carried on the cold breeze that nipped at Julia's cheeks. She inhaled the briny scent deeply, feeling both exhilaration and the flutter of nerves in her stomach. Behind her, Clara's fingers tightened around her own, and her grandson pressed his face against the window, eyes wide at the jagged silhouette. They parked in a gravel lot scattered with driftwood, and Julia carried the music box toward the lighthouse's heavy door. The ancient wood creaked as Mark pushed it open, revealing a spiral staircase curling upward in gloom. Rose's key glinted in Julia's hand as she inserted it into a small lock carved into the tower's interior wall. With a soft click, a hidden panel swung inward to reveal a dusty niche lined with sea-weathered driftwood and a single glass bottle sealed with wax. Inside the bottle lay a scroll tied with blue ribbon. Julia's fingers trembled as she extracted it, the ribbon unraveled like a sigh of relief. To the keeper of the melody, she read aloud in a hushed voice, "You have journeyed far to reclaim what was lost." Within these words lies the final harmony that binds past, present, and future. Speak it aloud and let the music guide you home. Before Mark could ask what came next, a distant rumble echoed through the tower, so deep it felt like the earth itself was shifting beneath their feet. The glass bottle rattled on the driftwood shelf, the scroll's ribbon fluttering as if caught in an unseen breeze. Julia's voice trembled as she unrolled the scroll, the ribbon slipping through her fingers like a sigh. She cleared her throat and began to read the faded script aloud. Where melody meets memory, the heart shall open its door. The words seemed to hang in the salty air, resonating against the stone walls of the tower. As the final syllable left her lips, the music box tucked against her chest began to hum softly, its ballerina spinning in perfect, smooth circles for the first time in years. A low rumble built beneath their feet, growing into a cacophony that shook loose grains of sand from the walls. Mark jumped forward, bracing himself against the spiral railing, while Clara clutched her son to her side. The hidden panel behind Julia swung fully open, revealing a narrow, twisting tunnel carved into the cliff's rock face. Brilliant beams of sunlight and sea spray winked in from below, suggesting a secret passage leading down toward the crashing waves. Heart pounding, Julia stepped toward the tunnel's mouth and then froze. At her feet lay a second parchment, half buried under driftwood shards. She bent to pick it up, her hands brushing the damp paper, and gasped as she recognized her own handwriting and entries she had penned decades ago, but never sent. The ink had bled in the salt air, yet her words were legible. If you follow this song, you will find what your heart truly seeks, or discover why some songs are meant to remain unsung. Behind her, the music box's melody swelled into a triumphant crescendo, echoing through the passage like a living thing. Julia's breath caught in her throat as she looked back at her family, Mark's determined eyes, Clara's hopeful smile, their grandson clutching the box as if it were a treasure, and realized that the next step would demand everything they had found: trust, courage, and the willingness to face a secret that might change them forever. Summoning every ounce of courage, Julia stepped into the narrow tunnel first, the salty breeze growing stronger with each cautious footstep. Mark followed close behind, his flashlight beam dancing across glistening walls etched with decades of sea spray. Clara held their grandson's hand tightly, his small lantern casting a warm glow that bounced off the damp stones. After winding through the claustrophobic passage, they emerged into a half-moonlit grotto carved deep beneath the lighthouse cliff. The tide rolled gently in the darkness, and moonbeams filtered through a jagged opening far above, revealing an iron-bound wooden chest resting on a natural stone pedestal. Julia approached the chest with trembling fingers, tracing the worn symbols carved into its lid, a treble clef entwined with a heart. With Mark's help, she lifted the lid to reveal a folded parchment sealed with blue wax and an antique bronze key engraved with the initials E. As Julia broke the seal, she found a letter penned in elegant looping script. To the keeper of this melody, you have guided your family back to one another. Within this key lies the final refrain, a song composed by my own hand to bridge those divided by fear. Unlock the music's true voice, and you will find the harmony you seek. Before she could finish reading, the rhythmic crash of waves swelled into a low roar, and the grotto's entrance slammed shut behind them with a thunderous thud. Clara's lantern flickered, and in the sudden gloom, the chest seemed to pulse as though alive. Julia clutched the bronze key, her heart pounding with both dread and anticipation, with this final verse: bind their past and future, or reveal a secret they were not yet ready to face. Julia's pulse raced as she grasped the bronze key, its weight heavy with promise. For a moment she hesitated, then remembered the letter's words. Within this key lies the final refrain. Flashing a glance at her family's anxious faces, she pressed the key into the rusty lock of her music box, which she had tucked safely in her coat pocket. The box shuddered and the lid creaked open wider than ever before, revealing a tiny hidden compartment lining its base. Mark and Clara pressed close as Julia lifted out a slender roll of parchment, its edges gilded and inscribed with delicate musical notation. She unrolled it on a flat slab beside the chest, an original composition lyrics and melody signed simply E. At once, the grotto filled with a soft echo, as though the cavern itself recognized the long-lost song. Clara's eyes glistened as she traced the notes in disbelief. It's the complete lullaby," she whispered. The one mother said was never finished. Their grandson leaned in, breath warm against the cool stone, and when Julia began to hum the first line, the music box joined in its once muted voice, now clear, resonant, and hauntingly beautiful. But before the final chord could settle, the tide's roar surged through the grotto entrance. A dark wall of water thundered against the closed doorway, rattling stones loose overhead. The family scrambled as cold spray whipped around them, and the sea's rumble became a roar. Julia clutched the parchment to her chest, heart hammering. The complete lullaby was in her hands. But escape now meant braving the rising water and trusting that this melody could light the way out of the deep. Julia's spine tingled as the sea surged, the cavern trembling under the relentless assault of roaring waves. Instinctively, she clutched the parchment to her chest and pressed her lips to the first lyric, her voice wavering but determined. The music box, perched on the stone slab, chimed in perfect harmony, its clear notes weaving through the chaos like a beacon. Mark grabbed Clara and their son, urging them toward the far side of the grotto, where a narrow ledge cut into the rock face. Each step was slick with brine, and the floor heaved beneath their boots. The wall of water crashed again, splintering spray into the gloom, and yet the song persisted, a fragile thread of sound guiding their feet. Julia's voice grew stronger with every line, her heart pounding in time with the melody's rhythm. She sensed the cavern responding, a faint glow traced along the tunnel walls, illuminating a series of carved symbols, musical notes entwined with drawn arrows. She realized in breathless clarity that the full composition wasn't just a song, but a map. "Follow the crescendo," she called, her words almost lost beneath the thunderous tide. Mark nodded, and together they traced the glowing arrows, stepping carefully from one wet stone to the next. Clara held their son close as he hummed the tune, his small voice adding a soft counterpoint that flickered like lantern light. At last, the passage curved upward toward a narrow slit where moonlight fought through spray. With a final triumphant chord from Julia and a chime from the music box, a section of rock slid open, revealing a slick, ascending stair. The roar of water receded as they climbed, the salty wind growing colder and drier with each step. Bursting into the moonlit cliffside air, Julia gasped, the nocturnal sky stretching ahead. Behind them, the grotto's entrance sealed silently, and the lullaby's last echo faded into the night. Safe at last, they huddled together on the rocky ledge, the song's final refrain lingering not in the cavern, but in their joined hearts. The sea breeze whipped through their hair as Julia, Mark, Clara, and their grandson steadied themselves on the rocky ledge, hearts still pounding from the grotto's roar. Above them, the moon cast a silver sheen on the waves behind. The cave had sealed itself as if it never existed. Julia unfolded the parchment once more, tracing the final bars of the lullaby, now complete in her mind and in her music box. Clara pressed closer, noting a hidden line of tiny script at the bottom of the score where voices blend, the past and future mend. Beneath the ledge, nestled in a cleft of rock, sat an old wooden bench carved with a heart and treble clef. Mark brushed away sand to reveal an inscription, "Sing here under the watchful moon." Their grandson watched with wide eyes as Julia set the music box atop the bench and, turning to Mark, whispered, "One more time?" Hand in hand, they closed their eyes and sang the lullaby in unison. Their voices wove together, mother, daughter, grandson rising in harmony that seemed to echo off every cliff face and ripple across the water. As the final note lingered, the bench shuddered and split open along the carved lines, revealing a small compartment containing a tarnished silver locket engraved with E. Inside lay a portrait of a young woman, clearly the artisan's grandmother, holding the very same music box. On the back, one more line was scratched, "Carry this home, and let its song live on." Julia touched the locket and felt a warmth spread through her chest. In that moment, the weight of every trial, the divorce, the courtroom, the secret passage faded away. All that remained was the knowledge that their family's melody, now fully restored, would endure across generations. The tide's gentle lull replaced the grotto's fury as Julia clasped the tarnished locket to her heart. The moonlight danced on its silver surface, igniting memories of every trial they'd faced, the divorce's ache, the courtroom's harsh glare, the cavern's echoing roar. Mark held his daughter and grandson close as the sea's rhythmic pulse seemed to hum in time with their renewed bond. Julia opened the locket to reveal the artisan's grandmother, smiling back an image both foreign and familiar. Beneath it, a tiny engraving read, "Let every note guide you home." In that instant, Julia knew this journey would ripple far beyond the rocky ledge. Their song was now complete, and its harmony would carry them through the quiet moments ahead. Behind them, the lighthouse beacon swept across the water, its beam like a watchful guardian. Clara tucked the parchment into her coat pocket, while their grandson bounced on his toes, his eyes shining with wonder. Mark brushed a kiss across Julia's forehead, gratitude and awe mingling in his gaze. Together, they traced their footprints back along the cliff path, the delicate melody of the lullaby still singing in their ears. With each step, the locket's warmth spread through Julia's chest, an ember of hope rekindled. The world felt infinite and small, at once infinite in its possibilities, yet small enough to hold their family's healed hearts within its embrace. As the station wagon turned onto the coastal road, the first blush of dawn painted the sky in soft pastels. Julia pressed the locket against her blouse and whispered the final refrain under her breath, knowing that the true secret of this melody was not a hidden chamber or cryptic map, but the love that bound them together, unbroken, unwavering, and everlasting. Home felt different now, washed in the soft glow of dawn and humming with possibility. Julia slipped the silver locket into its velvet box and placed it on the mantel beside the music box as Mark brewed coffee, the rich aroma weaving through their cozy living room. Clara arranged fresh flowers cut from their garden, and the little boy dragged his teddy onto the couch, impatient to hear the lullaby once more. When Julia wound the music box, its melody floated through the house like a gentle breeze, stirring light across the walls. Neighbors paused in their own homes, turning toward the sound as if it carried a secret meant just for them. Outside, Anne and Emily set out chairs on the lawn, inviting anyone drawn by the tune to gather. Within minutes, familiar faces lost friends, distant cousins, curious neighbors assembled in a loose circle under the budding oak tree. Julia stepped forward, locket in hand, and raised her voice to speak. This song carried us through our darkest trials. It taught us that family isn't only by blood, but by the promise to show up for one another. Then, gently, she released the music box's tune into the morning air. One by one, the circle joined in humming the refrain, each voice weaving into a living tapestry of belonging and forgiveness. As the final note faded, a soft applause rippled through the gathering, no fanfare, only genuine warmth. Julia glanced at her family, their eyes shining with tears and smiles, and knew that the true journey had only just begun each day. Each shared melody, their hearts would grow braver, kinder, more united. Months later, the music box's lullaby had become the heart's quiet companion in Julia's home. Sunlight streamed through the living room windows each morning, illuminating the silver locket on the mantel and the gentle swirl of the ballerina as its melody played. Julia often found herself pausing at the window, listening as the tune drifted on the breeze, sometimes joined by the distant hum of neighbors who had come to cherish its promise of hope. Clara's husband, once distant and guarded, had grown into a steadfast partner in daily life. Together, they hosted small backyard gatherings where the lullaby served as both overture and benediction, welcoming old friends and new faces alike. Their son no longer clung shyly to his mother's side, but instead danced freely to the music, his laughter weaving into the melody as naturally as sea glass washes ashore. Mark, having witnessed the fragile power of a single song, rekindled his passion for teaching music at the local community center. He invited Julia to co-lead a weekly melody and memory workshop, where seniors and children alike gathered to share stories, sing old tunes, and discover the bonds that cross generations. Each week, as the lullaby filled the room, Julia felt the echo of her own journey, how a simple song had mended broken hearts and rewritten her family's story. On quiet evenings, Julia and her grandson would sit on the back porch with mugs of steaming tea, the music box open between them. She'd tell him the tale of the lighthouse, the secret grotto, and the hidden melody that led them home. As the boy's eyes grew heavy and he drifted to sleep, Julia would softly close the lid, whispering, "Our song lives on in you." And so their days unfolded, ordinary and extraordinary all at once, each note of the lullaby. A reminder that family is the song we choose to keep singing, no matter where life's currents carry us. In that enduring harmony, Julia found her second spring, one that would blossom in her heart and in the hearts of all who heard the hidden melody for years to come.